I really liked the 2012 movie Wreck-It Ralph.
Huh?
Stay with me, I promise this has a point. It's a good film overall. I'm a big video game nerd and I loved seeing a movie about video games, but far above the quality of the usual video game movies. Although, to be fair to Wreck-It Ralph, it wasn't working with an established IP, it had its own original thing, so it did have a bit of a leg up. But one of the things I loved most about it was Sugar Rush. It was a candy-themed kart racer, think Mario Kart, but worse for your teeth, and when I saw it, I thought, wow, a confectionery-themed kart racer would be so much fun. But sadly, no one took that idea and ran with it. Someone please make a candy-themed racing game. I have ideas, call me. No, don't call me, I hate phone calls. Send me a courier pigeon or something. The closest thing we got to this is, weirdly enough, 2018's All-Star Fruit Racer, which is a bit of an oxymoron since that food-themed racer is, healthy food-themed. God damn, if your parents ever offered you a treat after dinner and they gave you like an apple or something, you'll know exactly this level of pain too well. Nevertheless, I bought it when it first came out, and after about an hour, I closed it down and then forgot about it for 5 years. Bit of an omen, really. So today we're looking at All-Star Fruit Racer and we're going to be seeing if it deserved better. Let's do this, or as the game says, let's fruit. Game, why do you say that?
'Cause fruit, that's my thing.
Right, but it doesn't really work.
Sure it does. I'm fruit themed. Instead of race, I said fruit.
Right, but that's not a play on words or anything, that just sucks. Anyway, let's get on with this so I can go back to playing that new Peach game I bought on my Switch that I finally got my hands on. I have a Switch now, I'm weirdly excited about that. All-Star Fruit Racing is a karting game set in a fruit-themed world, but that title is just long enough for me to not want to type it over and over again, so I'm going to call the game Mango. It's fruit-themed, get it? It's clever. Mango has no story element whatsoever, so I won't divide the review into sections because the story section would just be me speculating on why all these random people are in a crazy fruit world, and my therapist has specifically told me to avoid further brain damage. This means the whole review gets to be about the gameplay. I do like a story, of course, but solid gameplay can more than make up for a lack of story. Hell, Mario Kart never has a story, and yet it's fucking phenomenal, and yeah, we're going to be playing the comparison game a little bit here. Any kart racer with combat items and weird wacky tracks that claims not to have been taking cues from Mario Kart should be reported to the Inquisition for lying. First of all, let's look at the drivers. You'll notice that a lot of them are locked and you need to complete certain milestones before you get them, and I don't really mind this. Mario Kart Double Dash, Wii, DS 7 and 8, I believe, all had character unlocks, and it can be a fun way to make a game more replayable. The issue for Mango, though, is that its characters really aren't characters. To the game's absolute credit, each racer does have a unique outfit, a unique colour palette, a unique standing idle animation, and a unique power-up, but none of them really stand out from one another. Firstly, I'll be a bit of a bitch and rag on the outfits. They're not great. None of them really look all that nice, and there wasn't a single racer who I looked at and thought, they are fabulous and I love them, because all of them look like they're just wearing regular clothes. Their outfits don't stand out, which is a little bit disappointing. Now, each racer does have a fruit theme behind them, but it's seldom reflected in their visual design aside from their colour palette and their logo, which again, I'll give them credit. Their colours are consistent with the fruit that they are themed after, and their logo is usually just a picture of the fruit, so I guess the bare minimum was achieved, but it did mean that unlocking new characters never really felt all that amazing or like a real accomplishment, but then again, there is another reason for that, and I'll get to that later. From what I can tell, each racer does have a unique idle animation when you're on the character selection screen, which I think is a nice touch, but sadly none of that personality is translated into the races. About those idle animations, I was wrong. I was gathering more footage and touching up the script, yeah, after I'd already started recording it. I'm very clever, and I realised that most of the races actually share them. I even checked between the different sized races, and yeah, they mostly share cloned idle animations, which doesn't really matter hugely, but now that I've noticed it, I can't really stop noticing it, you know? Jesus squid diddling Christ. All the racers have the same victory and defeat emotes, the same pose for when they go really fast, and many share their unique item casting animations. On the subject of unique power-ups, many of them are just reskins of one another. At least 3 racers have the same homing missile.
What are you on about? They're all different bits of fruit, totally unique.
Yeah, that's not really how that works. Several have items that they deploy behind their cars to slow enemy drivers down, but one is this weird kiwi thing with magnets. What the fuck does that have to do with fruit?
Oh, I see the confusion. A kiwi is both a bird and a fruit.
That wasn't the source of my confusion, and I think you knew that.
Oh right, the magnet. Well, that's because the carts are made of metal.
Right, okay, but how is the magnet fruit themed?
Because of the kiwi!
But what do kiwis have to do with magnets? Oh, fuck off. I admit this is a fairly weird place for me to be drawing a logic line because most of the power-ups aren't even fruit themed. I don't know what ice has to do with fruit. I'm not sure what a snowball has to do with fruit. I don't know what a force field has to do with fruit, but apparently here we are. A few racers have drop big fruit behind car powers, which are a bit different from each other, I'll grant. One is an apple that doesn't move, and if you crash into it, you go spinny spinny. One is a mango that moves a little bit, and if you crash into it, you go spinny spinny. And the final one is a giant coconut that rolls behind your car and completely crushes any racer it happens to come into contact with. And for me at least, this comes to why the other characters are almost pointless. See, you might be tempted to take a character that has a homing attack as their unique skill, but Coconut Girl, whose name I still have not learned despite the fact that I mained her for a long time, was my go-to because I realised her giant coconut would basically prevent enemy drivers from ever catching up to me. It doesn't help that their AI just isn't very good, and they're actually a lot more likely to intentionally drive into hazards than avoid them. But how do the item pickups work? Well, you see, in Mango you have a juicer mechanic which allows you to collect different coloured fruits and mix them in tanks to create items. You can mix multiple tanks together to make really potent powers, well in theory. Or you can keep all of the tanks separate and have 4 items ready to go whenever you need them. If you combine all 4 tanks, you get your superpower, and it actually doesn't take a whole lot to charge all 4 tanks, so my throw a coconut and win tactic was far too often the most viable thing to do. There are of course situations where it didn't work, one being when the game decided to just keep ripping off Mario Kart and replace the fruit pickups with randomised items, which rarely ever felt like they coincided with my place in the race, but we'll talk about that more later. The other being when the final track came around, which was just Rainbow Road but fruit themed and also not as good. I actually laughed really hard when this track appeared, like deep belly laughter, because whilst comparisons to Mario Kart are inevitable, this is just so on the nose. Mango, you really don't want to draw too much of a comparison between yourself and the titan that is Mario Kart, because you cannot hold a candle to it in any regard. I know they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so I guess Mario Kart should feel both honoured as well as a bit fucking embarrassed for Mango. It was adorable, or at least it would have been if, again, the track wasn't shit. But yeah, sadly my coconut tactic isn't going to work here because there are no sides on this track, so my coconut will just roll off into oblivion. But don't worry, dear viewer, my inability to abuse the coconut tactic isn't the only reason I don't like this track. It feels way too long to actually drive, the majority of the music is just awful, and the game's wonky construction makes the random jumps and sudden bends really jarring to put up with. However, even without Big Coconut, I still had one other tactic to spam if I really needed to, and that's called level restart. Now, balance isn't really something the game does well or at all. If you start losing, you're very probably going to keep losing, and if you take an early enough lead, then nothing short of every other racer present hitting you at least twice with all the items will knock you out of first place, even on the highest difficulty. If you do drop behind, you might look at the boost pads or the speed items and think those could really help me, but no, not really. The speed buff you get is like 2%, and really you should only be using that when you're already in first place to maintain your first place. Every kart feels like it has the exact same speed and handling, except in the hard mode, then every other kart on the track is much faster than yours by default. Unless you've already gotten ahead of them, then they go back to might as well not exist territory. And again, even on the occasions when I did start losing and couldn't catch up in a significant way, even using speed boosts and homing attacks, I could always just restart the race from the menu whenever I wanted. You can restart any race you want at any point, and the game has no way to penalise you. In fact, sometimes it rewards you for doing this. When you start a race, you don't start in the position that you ended the last race in, it's completely random, so what you can do is just keep restarting until you're in first or second place, then you have a huge advantage. The advantage is a bit lesser in the hard mode, but even then we loop back to the idea that taking an early lead is all you need to do, and maintaining it once you have it is not a real challenge. Listen, I get pissed off too when in Mario Kart a blue shell hits me or the lightning strikes me right before the end and I lose my position, but I recognise that those items serve a very important purpose. Blue shells and lightning are definitely annoying, but because of how they work in Mario Kart, it allows the racers at the far back to get a real chance to, if not beat you in this race, to disrupt the leading group and make it easier for them to win the Grand Prix in the long run. Now, to be fair, Mango does have a few homing items, but they only ever target the person directly in front of them, and due to the wonkiness of the terrain, they can very easily be destroyed before they ever get to their target, so the lead racer will rarely be contested.
Ah, but Veronica, I'm a fun for all the family game. I can't be too hard, otherwise the younger audiences might get spooked.
Okay, so why do game developers keep thinking that kids are stupid and can't play or learn to play video games? Fine, no, fine, you don't aim to be entertaining through challenge, and that's fine. Hell, some of my favourite games aren't hard and yet are still great fun. A Hat in Time isn't overly difficult, Toem isn't exactly complicated, and Firewatch isn't quite Dark Souls, but they're all still great games to play and replay because their entertainment factor comes from other elements. Usually it's partly due to their presentation and soundtrack, but sometimes a simple gameplay loop is fun on its own. So let's ask Mango, is your gameplay loop fun on its own? No. No, not really. In fact, it's often borderline infuriating. I will say now that the game is technically functional, like on paper it works, but it's a shame that I don't play video games on fucking paper, isn't it? I did have one crash, which isn't really great, but I've had far worse, and yes, that's the concession I'm making these days. And to the game's absolute credit, when you press go, the cart tends to go, so that's a nice touch. The programming overall, though, feels inelegant and often a bit clunky. The carts don't feel smooth to control and aren't fun to drive. Collisions aren't great. A lot of bits of scenery have far bigger hitboxes than you'd expect, and the game is so jagged that lurching to a complete stop feels really icky, for lack of a better descriptor. Not just when hitting the environment, but when taking damage of any kind, because you slow down so suddenly that it somehow gave me whiplash and I'm just playing a video game. I wondered what it was that made being slowed down feel so much worse in this game compared to, say, Mario Kart or Sonic Racing, to use a different example for the sake of flavour. And I don't think it's any one thing. You see, for me there wasn't a moment where the gameplay really grabbed me. There wasn't an element in this game that I can point to and say, yes, this is really good, because no mechanic, no character or no environment ever really engaged me. The game was just unpleasant, and without anything good to distract me, every bad thing about it feels so much more exaggerated than it otherwise would. Now, to be fair to the game, the driving isn't all bad. I mean, it's pretty damn close, but there are some positive elements. I like it when karting games map the acceleration to the shoulder buttons, because I feel a lot more in control of my speed and it's a lot more comfortable to press for long stretches of time, so I'm glad the game does that. And it does have a drift mechanic. You hold a button to drift whilst turning, and if you finish the drift on your terms, then you get a little boost. Simple, elegant, classic. However, the game does add one new mechanic to this whole mess for some goddamn reason. If you drift for too long, then you risk your car stalling out. Now, I think I get why this exists. At least, again, on paper. The devs probably didn't want you drifting and boosting non-stop, so tried to cap your boost, but ironically, this doesn't actually solve that problem. You have a meter at the bottom of the screen that builds up whilst you're drifting, and if it hits the maximum for too long, then you will stall out, so you're encouraged to stop drifting every so often, but if you do, you get that boost I mentioned. Then the meter instantly goes back to zero, so this has actually encouraged me to abuse the drifting to get boost after boost. I've only stalled once in the tutorial, and only because you have to in order to finish the damn thing, and that took some doing, because whoever designed this test track wasn't exactly what I'd call a clever clogs. All of these turns in this test track are far too easy to drift around and get a boost without even coming close to stalling, so I have to intentionally stall my car out, and that just made me feel really bad. It's like one of those supposed to lose fights in an RPG, only this one felt more pathetic. Although, to be fair, I don't think I'd describe anyone responsible for this game as clever. I never stalled in a race, not even once. I came close a couple of times, but at best, one or two tracks actually have long enough turning stretches that you need to avoid drifting all the way. Everywhere else, the turns end soon enough so it won't be an issue. Still, this is a challenge concern, and the game doesn't want to be that. At least I hope not. I really hope not. It dropped the ball so hard on that front that it went right to the core of the earth and became the core of the earth. The game does have different difficulties, so I guess on some level it hopes to challenge, but not in a clever way. Hard mode doesn't improve the AI, there's still dumb as sweet corn in your ear. Sure, we'll go with that. And even in the easy mode, they're more violent than your average Londoner, so it's not like they're more aggressive in the hard mode, because they couldn't possibly be. They just seem to be faster. Faster than you, so again, we return to the need to take a lead and keep it if you want to win the race, and if you don't have a lead by halfway through the second lap, you may as well start over. It's not worth the stress. So is the racing fun? No, not really. It's not the worst I've ever seen. No, actually, it kind of is. The background music isn't great either. A lot of the tracks have very slow and understated music that often just doesn't fit the feel of a racing game. And I only realised the racers have voice lines in the races in my final play session because they're so quiet. I checked the volume settings, both the music and sound effects settings were at their maximum, so I guess the game is just weirdly quiet. Still though, the game could be good based on its visuals alone. I mean, it's not, but it definitely could have been. To be fair, I like a few tracks in the sense of they have something approaching nice scenery, but the game has alarmingly few unique courses and reuses locations heavily throughout the career. The only thing it will change is how the item pickups work. From a gameplay perspective, I think there are about 2 tracks that I actually kinda sort of like. There's this one, this sort of barrel-themed race course, though it does have 2 big issues. One is this shortcut near the end here. The AI racers virtually never use it, and even if they do use it, they can't avoid the obstacles that will be slowing them down, so if you can use it, you'll be so far ahead that you basically can't be taken down. The other is the fact that this course has 5 laps, and it really doesn't need 5 laps. In fact, a couple of courses have way too many laps for how long the track already is. The other track I liked was this ice-themed castle. It's got a single long stretch that has sections rather than laps, and I quite like that, although I dislike the music a lot because it's entirely too quiet and slow, and I'm not entirely sure what ice and snow has to do with fruit, come to think of it. That said, whilst writing this, I couldn't remember either of these tracks' names, so them being my favourite isn't so much a I really like them situation, it's more of these lackluster courses that all would have put me to sleep if they weren't so infuriating, these two are the least boring. But the takeaway from this is that the game's presentation really doesn't save it. Look, I will say there are some more details that I did like. One track is a Jurassic Park reference with fruit dinosaurs, which was kind of amusing, and I did like the coconut Death Star that appears in the Rainbow Road wannabe stage, but these little details don't save the experience. This game has 8 Grand Prix in total, but in truth it has about 3 Grand Prix worth of unique racetracks, so everything gets tedious fast because you're doing the same things over and over again. Now, I will offer some credit, the game does try to mix things up. One cup has you race against only 3 AI opponents rather than the usual 10. Well, 9, I guess, because you're one of the 10. That's sort of how maths works. But what's really weird is that this is the second to last cup that you play, and then we're right back to having 10 races in total, and I don't really get why. Another way the game tries to spice everything up is by having some races use an elimination mechanic. Basically, if you stay at the back for too long, you're out, which is kind of a nice idea, but I never even came close to losing even once, even against just 3 other drivers. At least not in any of the career Grand Prix. When I tried a fast championship, which is like the Grand Prix but called something different. Okay, so you do get to choose the difficulty, but you don't get to choose what tracks you do, so yeah, that's the difference. But yeah, I did get eliminated once in one of these, because I wasn't actually paying attention, so yeah, that's on me. Still though, no matter how the game tries to mix things up, it can't compensate for the fact that at its core, it's just really not that fun or interesting to play. Mango feels like one of those cheap 3-for-1 PC games that you'd find in a supermarket bargain bin. The AI isn't great, as on some tracks they'll just turn and drive off into oblivion without any sort of prompting. Like, what the fuck are they doing? They do this at the start of this race. Like, what's going on here? The track design is just sort of alright at its absolute peak, and the unlockable extras really don't make me want to play more. Sure, the game does try to keep you hooked with custom carts, and you know me, custom shit is my bread and monster munch. God, I'm fat. You can mix and match parts and paint jobs to make your own unique cart, but I did this like twice and then just sort of gave up on it because it didn't feel rewarding. All carts have the same basic body shape, and if you do mess with the paints, then there's a chance that whatever racer you'll be picking will have a completely different colour palette and it will clash, which bothers me greatly. From what I can tell, you're not even affecting your cart's speed or handling, so there's not really anything about this that works for me. The other locked racers, I just don't care about them. I unlocked a few and I did try them out, but I always went back to Coconut Girl because her power was by far the most useful for the majority of races. There really is nothing rewarding about this game.
Well, you could try the online mode. If my AI and systems are too easy to abuse for their majesty, then maybe other players are the rush you need. Besides, you have a month of online because you were replaying Elden Ring, you might as well put it to use where you can.
Yeah, you know what, that's actually kind of a fair point this time around. Okay, I'll join a game, or I guess I'll make a new game and do some multiplayer. So, I sat at this screen for like 30 minutes and no one joined. I then tried again, and again, and again, and again. I think the online mode is about as dead as the dodo.
Well, I came out in 2018. It's not my fault that my online mode has no players.
Hey, so you know how Team Fortress 2 and GTA Online and Counter-Strike Go and Fortnite and Dawn of War and Space Marine and Minecraft and well a dozen more games all came out significantly further back than you did and still have active player bases? You know how the oldest amongst those was released in 2004 and is still kicking even 20 fucking years later? You know why that is?
Is it because they don't suck?
It's because they don't suck, yes. The reason no one is playing you, Mango, isn't because you're a few years old, it's because you're just not very good and you don't bring anything interesting to the table save for that whole power-up mixing system, and even then that's wrapped up in a subpar racing game that isn't even as good as many karting games from the previous generations. And you know what, that whole power-up mixing idea you had, it ain't even that good. I guess it was just easier than balancing out the items properly like a real game would. Look, I'll be completely fair here, All-Star Fruit Racing is not the worst game ever, not by a long shot. It's not even the worst game I've ever personally played. I've played played far worse titles from both bigger and smaller developers. It is, however, frustrating to engage with, and when it isn't that, it's just boring, it's uninspired, its presentation is sort of cute but only at a first glance. Its music is lousy, its track design is inelegant, and it almost feels like it was made by someone who didn't actually know what the physics for this game would feel like, yet made the tracks anyway. The characters, despite their looks, don't really have distinctive personalities, and the game's ability to reward you for playing with new items is very hit or miss, or at least in my case it was all misses. I said at the beginning that I recently got my hands on a Nintendo Switch. I needed something to play in bed during my really depressive episodes or whilst I'm on the toilet, and one of the games I grabbed for it was, of course, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now, it does have some problems. I hate how one of the power-ups is just coins. I never need coins in a race like that. I need an item when I drive into an item box, you fuck, and I dislike how some of the track's redesigns were handled, but otherwise I think it's mostly fucking fantastic. It maintains that core Mario Kart appeal, and it really does learn from the games that came before it. Hell, some of the track reimaginings are genuinely fantastic. I love the N64 Rainbow Road reworking. It suits it so well, and it's my favourite track in the base game. Mango didn't learn from the years of karting games that came before it. It just did the bare minimum required to pass as a karting game, but the bare minimum isn't enough to sustain interest. All-Star Fruit Racing is a game of wasted potential. One that only aspired to be another karting game with only a single truly unique idea that it could barely commit to. If it came out 20 years ago, it might have been decent, but by the standards of its own time, 2018 mind you, it's a really shoddy and unenjoyable product that deserves to be forgotten, so let's stop giving it our attention. If it somehow wasn't clear, I'm not recommending this one. It's not a diamond in the rough, it's more like a slightly dried out dog poo in the rough, and the rough is also just more dog poo. That'll do. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I am aiming to get a second review out this month as a sort of sorry for missing last month, and it will be my very first Nintendo game that I cover. Let's hope Nintendo doesn't try to monetize the shit out of it. If anyone has a good method to circumvent that, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Until then, take it easy, my loves. We'll see you next time.